Hello everyone and welcome back to the Deercast discussions with me, Harry and Tom.
Welcome.
We've got another very interesting episode for you. We thought we'd give you a bit of a chat through, say you're looking to get into reloading. You've seen people loading their own ammo, you're interested in the potential cost savings, which maybe
Once you bought all
there's
of
a
this
slight
stuff, yeah,
I mean the economics depends how much you shoot. I think is the main thing on that. But obviously the accuracy dividends you can get are quite big in terms of you can really reduce your group size and get some really good consistency. Maybe you're looking to go and load some copper ammunition.
Yeah.
That's
or maybe you're preparing for the next Armageddon and you want to be completely self-sufficient.
Whatever you like. Lots of people are looking into it. So we thought we'd just give a chat through of like the sort of entry level reloading gear.
Yeah.
This is all Tom's gear. So Tom, what do we got?
So probably the simplest way to kind of talk through it is if you imagine you've just fired a round in your rifle, it gets ejected out, and you think, right, I now want to reload this. What do I do? So first step would be to try and is to clean it. And part of that cleaning process, the first thing is trying to remove the spent primer out the bottom so you can clean what's called the flash hole. So you kind of do two steps in one, and what I tend to do is neck size the case. So if you think about it, the case is, as it's fired the bullet out the end, the neck has expanded out like that to allow the bullet out, and as the powder sort of forced it out at the end. So you need to do something to make that neck back down nice and tight, but also make it uniform again. So I tend to neck size it, and your neck sizing die, which is essentially just a tube of metal that the bullet then gets, or the case gets forced up into, will have, and you might not be able to see it on this, but it'll have a little rod that protrudes out the bottom, which then pops the primer out. So one of these neck sizing dies would fit into a press like that, and essentially the press sits in the top, the case sits on the bottom, and when you operate the lever, the case gets pressed up into the die, and the primer pops out the bottom, and that's it. So this then essentially performs two functions, which is firstly making the neck tight and uniform again, and secondly popping out the primer. Now, if you really wanted to, we're not going to go into it on this episode, but you can full length size cases with essentially doing the same purpose, but instead of just making the neck uniform, you make all of that case uniform again. So once you've popped out the primer, you then want to clean out the flash hole, and you can do that with lots of little tools, essentially sort of almost like a mini screwdriver. Basically, you're just scraping out spent carbon and gunpowder. You've then got a nice clean or semi-clean case. I then tend to pop them in an ultrasonic cleaner, which just shakes it essentially, and removes all that dirt and grime and everything, and you get lovely, horrible looking foul liquid in the bottom of this at the end. Some people will use tumbling media cleaners to do their cases with, but I tend to find an ultrasonic cleaner just works really, really well.
Is this one from Amazon?
It is. So what I should say is I started doing reloading when I lived in a one-bedroom flat and had next to no money. So most of the kit, when I first bought it, it had to be two things. Firstly, cheap, and secondly, had to be really small, so it packed away in sort of cupboards everywhere. And I'm gradually sort of going through the process of upgrading and updating some of it. But this is one thing that has survived because there's just no reason not to change it. I can fit sort of 10 to 20 cases in there, and I think it's about 30 quid off Amazon to begin with, and it does the job. And the same with some of the dies and bits and pieces. I mean, that neck sizing die I showed you, it's one of the Lee dies, it's the cheapest one they do, and it works, and I've got no complaints, so I've never seen any reason to change it. So case has gone through here, it's been cleaned, you then need to leave it to dry. You then re-prime it with a primer tool, or you can do it off a press. And essentially then you've got a nice case, clean, re-primed, ready to go. So you want to dispense some powder into it. The cheapest, easiest way to do it is with one of these, a Lee Power, I think they're called the Lee Perfect Powder Measure. You set on here on the gauge how much powder you want to go into it. This bit, the red hopper, is filled up with powder. You put the case on the bottom there, pull the handle down, and it will discharge some powder in there. The best thing, you can do it like that directly into the case and then shove a bullet in the top and you're ready to go. Or if you want to sort of really make sure that everything's consistent, everything's bang on, is you then run that measure of powder over a set of scales, and this is a balance beam set of scales. You can get electronic scales, but I tend to find sort of proper old-fashioned balance beams are the most reliable and accurate, but they are slightly more expensive than the little electronic gizmos. So you've then got a case that's been cleaned, reprimed, powder in it. You then pop it onto the press, and instead of your neck sizing die, you'd replace it with a bullet seating die, which for all intents and purposes look very, very similar. And all this is again a tube of metal that has a dial in the top that essentially you choose how far into the case you want that bullet to be pushed, and that's all this is doing, is that as you operate the lever on the press pushes the bullet, the case and the bullet that you've popped into the top of it up into this. Depending on how tightly you've wound the top lever will depend on how far you want the bullet pressed into it. And that would then be that process then complete. You then in theory have a round ready to go. We won't go into it in this video, but you can mess around with the depth, the seating depth of how far you want to push that bullet in or out of the case. And the final step I would advocate is using a set of vernier calipers to make sure that your bullet is actually loaded, or the whole round is loaded to the right length. It's not too short and it's not too long. If it's too short, you'll end up with all sorts of pressure issues. If it's too long, it potentially won't chamber. And so it's just worth checking these and checking it against what's called SAMI specs and just making sure that it fits within that range for your caliber. Now, this is a much bigger sort of topic than we could possibly ever fit into one episode, but if you did want to go into case prep, so once you've washed that case, into really sort of making those as consistent as you possibly can, then you can use lots of other tools that are sort of shown in this this stand here. For example, deburring the mouth of the case, or using this, sorry Harry, trimmer to cut down the length of the case and deburr them as well. What we're probably going to do at some point is do a series of videos on the reloading process. We might do one where we do case prep, we might do one where we do powder dispensing and discharge, and one where we do bullet seating. So you'll kind of see each of those different processes in a bit more detail. But we did this video, someone asked us, they said, well, I'm thinking of getting into it, what would I need, how does it all work? And this is probably the first in that series. So,
and what roughly do you think someone needs to spend? Golden question.
Good question. So I bought all of this probably back in 2017-18, and I think at the time probably to get me reloading, I first bought a Lee, I can't remember what they're called, loading set, and it sounds ridiculous, but it's one tool that you do all of this with. The only thing you need to add into it is a hammer. And you genuinely put an empty case into this, essentially it's a die, hammer it in, you then hammer it back out the other end, you then put a primer in, hit the primer with a hammer to seat it, pour some powder in, and then drop a bullet in the top and hit it with a hammer until it's all back down again. And I think you can pick up those kits for about 50 quid. So if you really want to get into very cheap reloading, you can go with that. For everything you see here, this was about 30 quid. This was £120, this was about £40, set of calipers you can pick up for about 20 quid, press was about sort of 120 I think it was, and the dies and other bits and pieces you can buy them in sets and bits and pieces, but you can probably get all the dies you'd need for about 50 quid, and all the sort of case prep materials as well, probably sort of 20 or 30 pounds. What I would say is if you're looking to start, there's no need to rush out and buy new, because most of this stuff is pretty indestructible. And actually, if you look on somewhere like the Stalking Directory or eBay, you'll find some quite good reloading kit that people have just stopped using, and so they posted it on there, and they're normally selling it for sort of half or three-quarters of the price, and you'll get some really good stuff on there.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think when someone asked me the question the other day, it basically came to between 200 and 300 quid to buy everything and be ready to go out reloading is probably what you're looking at.
Yeah, brilliant. And I mean, the other really good piece of advice is to read the Lee. Is it the Lee manual on reloading? That one I read. I mean, you don't even have to go out and buy it. It's online, I think, for free. And that's just, it breaks everything down, and it's just so easy to read and simple, and it gives you a background for everything. It's got a page on each caliber, and it's got all the specs in there. Like, that is just, the sort of best reference material I've seen. And I think
Okay.
each of the sort of like Hornady's got one, and they've all the sort of
Yeah.
main manufacturers have got one.
And it's worth doing because I mean you are ultimately messing around with gunpowder, with bullets, and I know everyone will sort of say, oh well, a rifle's chambered to ridiculously high pressure, so even if I get it really wrong, it won't be that bad. I mean, do you really want to take that risk? You might as well read up, and it can be, if you get it right, and once you get it right, it's incredibly satisfying.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we've had some great results with some reloaded Barnes bullets, haven't we?
Yeah, absolutely.
In your Sauer, sort of going through a group sort of size of my thumbnail, basically.
Yeah, exactly. It's well worth doing.
Yeah,
if you've got the time.
And we'll probably do another video on the economics in a separate one. We'll tot up how much this all costs, talk through how much a kind of loaded round is versus a factory bought one, and you can make up your own minds from there.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks very much again for listening. As ever, if you've got questions, comments, pop them in the comment section. Do like and sort of share, etc. And we'll hopefully catch you on the next one. Thank you very much.